you certainly can build extensions with frameworks, but you can also build extensions just using sort of vanilla JavaScript. So, especially if you're doing that, then having a really good understanding of the platform and what it supports is helpful. I'm curious for your thoughts though. What do you think about sort of how much JavaScript do people need to know, both like for extensions and just in general? I feel like for anyone that's sort of new to development, it's always hard for them to know how long should they spend learning all of the fundamentals.
Yeah. So I think personally, I think it should be um at least the basics, right? The basics
Yeah.
that could get you started, understanding the basics of JavaScript. You might not really have to learn TypeScript like immediately, right? But understanding how JavaScript does, how it interacts with the browser, how it interacts with the DOM, how to change items with the DOM, and understand async JavaScript. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to on that episode of Talks to the Evergreen. So in this particular episode, we're gonna be diving deep into Google Chrome extensions, right? From building out your first extension to publishing to the store, right? And also speaking about security best practices. So this episode is for every developer out there thinking about, should I build a Google Chrome extension today? And joining me in this episode is someone who knows the ins and outs of building Chrome extension, from the Google Chrome extension team at Google. Oliver, it's great to have you here. Hi, Oliver.
Hey, great to meet you. I'm so excited to be here. I think I was just saying before we started that I've seen some of the other episodes. I really like this series. So, yeah, I'm very glad to be here and excited to talk about Chrome extensions.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Amazing. It's really great to have you on this episode because this is something I really wanted to like talk about. I think the last year on this episode, and getting to actually have to record this with you is really amazing. So let's just jump right into introductions first before we go into like the matter at hand right now. Um,
Yeah.
so give us an introduction of what you do currently, what you've been up to, and yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Oliver. I work on the Google Chrome team. In particular, I work as a developer relations engineer. So, what that means is that I get to work very closely with developers and be sort of an external face to the Chrome extension ecosystem and help as much as I can with developers that are trying to build their own extensions. And so this sort of encompasses a whole variety of things. I'm one of the people that works on writing the documentation that you might see on developer.chrome.com. I write sample codes. I speak at conferences. And then I also speak directly to developers either through something like this or just having a conversation over email or in the mailing list we have to try and sort of answer questions and then understand what feedback they might have for us and the platform and how we can make the platform better in the future. I'm also an editor in the W3C Web Extensions community group. So this is a
Amazing.
sort of cross-browser group that we have with representatives from Safari and Firefox and Edge, where we all try and sort of build a common platform and a set of APIs that works across browsers so that hopefully if you're building an extension and you start in one browser, you have an easy time making it work in other browsers and there isn't lots that you need to change.
Amazing, amazing. So quickly just take us through a typical day for you as a developer working on browser tooling. So what's your
Yeah.
day to day like?
It's really varied. It's always really hard to answer this question.
Yeah.
I think the mailing list that I mentioned is always sort of a common piece. I always try and check in there at the start of the day and the end of the day and just see what developers are talking about. And I think that's a really good guide for sometimes there might be very specific questions that I can answer, or I might see a conversation and not be able to jump in immediately, but I can make a mental note and say, oh, that's interesting. We were having a conversation recently about a feature like that, and I can pass this on as feedback. And then, like I mentioned, there's lots of other things that I can end up doing. So maybe writing some documentation, maybe recording a video, maybe doing some travel. That really depends on exactly what's happening that particular day and that particular week.
Huh. Amazing, amazing. So quickly thinking about Google Chrome extension, right? Because that's what this conversation is just gonna be around. Um, so what kind of problems does an extension solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Extensions are sort of the web plus more. That's how we like to think about them. And
Mm.
so they're based on all of the same technologies that you're used to if you're building for the web. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. But then they give you some additional capabilities that give you additional access. So in a web page, you can very much only sort of see and influence the content that's showing in that particular frame. But with an extension, you can access data from the browser. So you can access information about the bookmarks the user has or the user's history. Um, and you can access all these additional capabilities that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. And how you choose to use those can vary. So uh, you might just be building something for yourself. I have an extension which I use every day that always makes me smile, which is just this simple little extension I built. I have a light that I'm using now to sort of make sure you can see me on camera, and I always want to
Mm.
have that turned on when I join meetings. So I have an
Okay.
extension that just detects when I join a meeting and turns the light on for me. And I always smile when that happens. It's such a simple extension. I'm really the only person that would use it, but it feels like a really nice use case. And then, of course, there are use cases that either appeal to like a much broader market or are used in like enterprise and education, where it might actually be installed on your behalf and it's not something that you choose to install.
Hmm. Okay, cool. So when should developers not use an extension or develop an extension? So what use cases do you feel like developers shouldn't develop or shouldn't use an extension?
Yeah. So I think really starting from figuring out what do I need that extensions can give me that the web can't. So
Hmm.
if you're purely building some sort of simple web page or an app that you can just use existing JavaScript APIs for, then maybe building on the web is fine. But if you start to need some of these additional capabilities where either you need to be running in the background even if the user closes your tab, or you need to be running across multiple tabs and pulling other information from the browser, then an extension might start to make sense. You definitely can build an extension which is just like a wrapper around something that you built for the web. So maybe you built a
Huh.
game in JavaScript and then you have an extension which is just a wrapper around that. And that's fine, and maybe you want to do that. But I personally find that sort of the less interesting side of things. I think it's much more
Yeah.
exciting when you start to use some of the new capabilities that you have.
Hmm. Okay, cool. Um, so thinking about the getting started, right, or building Chrome extensions.
Yeah,
So can you just take us through a step by step process? So basically referring to like from setup to publishing to the store. So what are the step by step processes before a developer or a team of developers, right, could could publish the extension to the Chrome Web Store?
yeah, absolutely. I'm curious. Have you built an extension before? Or if not, I can start sort of completely from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, I've gotten to build an extension. I think it was screen recording, a screen
Yeah.
recording extension I've gotten to build, but I didn't publish it right. I didn't publish
Okay.
it to the
Yeah.
store. Yeah, so I didn't get to the last step. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I imagine you might remember the manifest.json file.
Yeah, I think back then it was Manifest 2,
Yeah.
V2. Yeah,
So the manifest.json file is sort of the one key file that all extensions have, and it's
yeah.
just a JSON file with an object, and then that has a few keys that sort of give the browser some basic metadata and tell it what your extension is all about and where it can load all of the resources it needs. So at a minimum, you have sort of a name field, which is just a string with a name for your extension. You have a version, which is the a sort of version of your extension with your own versioning scheme, and then you have
Okay.
the manifest version, which, as you mentioned, is sort of the version of the platform that you're building on top of. So we did have manifest v2, we're now on manifest v3, and as you increase the manifest version, the APIs that you have access to change, the different behaviors can change. It's sort of our way of being able to make breaking changes. And then all you need to do for a simple extension is basically take that one manifest.json file, put it in an empty directory, and that directory is now an extension. You can go in Chrome, you can choose there's like a load unpacked button for loading something which isn't on the store, and you'd be able to load that as an extension. Of course, that's a pretty boring extension. It doesn't really do anything on its own. So there are then
Yeah.
additional keys that you can add to request new capabilities and sort of tell it about other scripts that you want to load from different file paths and start to run those in the browser. And then once you have that all finished, you can just take that directory, turn it into a zip file, and then we have a process where you can go to the Chrome Web Store, upload that zip file, and then after a short review, it will be published to the store and anyone can go ahead and install it. Hopefully that makes sense and sort of give you a good feel for at least the very basics.
Yeah, cool. Amazing. So speaking about tools and libraries that basically helps us speed up the development of Chrome extensions, right? So are they tools, are they libraries that could help developers build faster,
Yeah,
right?
so there's the sort of I'd say maybe two categories. There are sort of tools that don't change anything about how your extension works, but can help you in development. And then there
Okay.
are tools that are sort of more towards the framework side of things, are really sort of changing the code you write. So in the first category, a few things come to mind. Mozilla has a really great tool called WebExt. It's like web-ext, and that's a command line
Yeah.
tool, and it helps you with some of the steps that you might have during development. So, for example, you can run the command line uh, command, and it will start the browser with your extension already installed. So that's a nice way to just sort of simplify the process of getting the browser started with your extension running. Um, there are also other tools. Before I started at Google, I built a site that I quite like. It's called Web Extension Playground. And if you're familiar,
Mm.
I don't know if you've used like the TypeScript playground before or some of the other playgrounds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so this is sort of similar where with the TypeScript playground, the idea is it gives you a sort of editor UI, and within there you can write some code, and it will show you like how TypeScript would pass that. In the web extension playground, it's sort of like a it's based on the same libraries that Visual Studio Code uses behind the scenes, and so it gives you a similar sort of looking editor, and it already
Mm.
has the manifest.json file created for you. It already has all of the types for the extension APIs loaded. So it's quite a nice way to just jump into building a browser extension without needing to worry about installing all the types and remembering what the bare minimum keys you need are for the manifest.json file. Um, and then there's the other category of tools, which is tools that sort of change how you build. One which is very common is Mozilla has a web extension polyfill. And so I mentioned that we're trying to make web extension APIs as consistent as possible. One inconsistency
Yeah.
right now is that if you're building in Firefox or Safari, all of the APIs are accessed by doing browser dot. There's like a browser global, and then you can do browser dot tabs to access the tabs API or browser dot runtime to access the runtime API. But in Chrome, we don't
Okay.
support that, so you have to do Chrome dot. But this polyfill is basically something that you can load into your extension, and it will make browser supported everywhere, so you can write consistently. We want to solve that, so we have some changes behind flags right now to start supporting browser in Chrome. That's not released yet because we have some sort of incompatibilities and last changes to make, but I'm really excited about that. One other tool that I want to mention that's been becoming very popular recently is WXT, and this
Yeah.
is more of a sort of bigger framework for building extensions. It adds a lot of the sort of nice to haves that you might be familiar with in other frameworks. So, for example, hot reloading, as soon as you make a change, the extension can be
Mm.
reloaded and you can see that change right away. And also lots of sort of wrappers and utilities to make working with storage easier and working in content scripts easier. Um, yeah, so that's definitely something that I've seen the community gravitate more and more towards recently, and I'd recommend taking a look at.
Okay. Amazing. Um. So that's quite a number of tools and libraries, right? And
Yeah,
I think the idea is just to make it faster for developers to be able to build like better and faster Chrome extensions, right? Um, so quickly, just let's just touch on Manifest 3
yeah,
because, like I said, last time I wrote an extension which was like some years ago. If I remember correctly, the version was version 2,
yeah,
and before this episode, right? I was making my like personal researches and I got to see, oh, we have version 3 now and it has a lot of capabilities. So can you just touch on how it works and what to keep in mind? Like what change came in version 3, right, compared to
Yeah, for
the
sure.
V2?
So, as you mentioned earlier, the idea of the manifest version is it's our opportunity to make breaking changes. And of
Okay.
course, like we don't want to make breaking changes when we don't have to. We know that that causes churn, but there are
Yeah.
times where like we really see like we didn't design this API in the right way, or this API has problems, or just there weren't any problems, but we think we can do things better. And to do that, we need to make a breaking change. So to be able to do that, we introduced Manifest version 3, and this was to sort of address some performance and some privacy issues that we were seeing with Manifest v2 extensions. I think the biggest change that would impact all extensions is that we move to service workers. So extensions can sort of run code in two places. They can run code within a tab, and that's just sort of the same as if you added a script tag to a web page. Or they can also run code in what we call the background, which is sort of this invisible tab that the users can't see, but is an opportunity for you to run code that isn't going to be sort of seen by the user, that the user won't accidentally close by closing a tab. And so, um, yeah, that's a key part of extensions. Uh, the problem with having a background page is that the concept of a page is quite heavy. And so having that always loaded in the background for extensions that might not be running or have anything to do at this particular time was using up resources on a user's machine. And so we instead moved to using service workers as the technology that's used to run that code. And so this is still in the background, it's still something which is transparent to users. But the idea now is that we can basically start the service worker up when it has work to do and shut it down when it no longer has work to do. And so in doing that, we're able to preserve resources and make sure the extension is only running code when it really needs to. And so uh, that was a change that for some extensions was very small, and you could basically update your manifest just to say, I'm happy running the same code I already had in the background page in the service worker, and everything would work. We still support the same APIs, other than a few DOM based APIs. A service worker doesn't have a DOM, so there's no point having an API like document.create element, for example. Uh, for some other extensions, that was actually a sort of a bigger ask because they were using lots of different DOM APIs, and so moving to a service worker was a bigger piece of work. And we supported developers as much as we could, but that was a part of the work that you may have heard about in migrating to Manifest v3. There were also some other changes. One of the notable changes was to the web request API. This is sort of the API that content filtering extensions use to do their job. We still support the web request API in Manifest v3, but we've taken away some of the capabilities it had to basically block network traffic, because what we were seeing is that anytime Chrome wanted to make a network request, we'd have to pause that request, send data from the process where the request was happening to the process where the extension lived.
Mm.
The extension would have a chance to decide if it wanted to make any changes or to block that request. And then we'd send the result back to the process where the request is happening, and then that request would go ahead. And that has a performance cost, and it also has a privacy cost. That means all of the data about all of the requests that are happening in your browser are going to that other extension, which might not be something that you want. I mean, there are definitely genuine use cases for that, but it's something that we saw being abused as well. So we introduced a new API called declarative net request, which
Okay.
accommodates a lot of the same use cases, but in a more performant and privacy preserving way. And that was one of the other big changes to extensions that were impacted by that. I think we're now at a point where those extensions have been able to migrate, and they have sort of pretty good sort of feature compatibility between the two versions. But that was definitely something that I worked on a lot over the last few years, because it was a big change for those extensions.
Amazing. Pretty much a lot of change from V2 to V3. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
for
think
some extensions, not so much, but definitely, yeah, there were extensions where this was a big ask. So I'm very grateful to everyone in the community that worked through those changes. And I'm happy for the most part. It feels like we're sort of beyond that now. We're at a point where the platform is stable and we can start thinking about what's next and what's coming in the future versus focusing as much on the manifest v3 transition.
Yeah, cool, cool. So speaking about learning curve, right? Again, so do you feel like there's a
Yeah.
level of experience a developer should have in JavaScript or let's say TypeScript before they could start building out Chrome extensions?
So I think this is like the $1 million question. I think it's the same. I don't know. You might have heard, like, I think there've been discussions about this sort of thing in the past with if you're using a framework like React, do you need to learn all of the fundamentals of JavaScript? Um, I think my personal view is that maybe you don't need to know everything about JavaScript, but I think the
Mm-hmm.
more you know about JavaScript, the better. I don't think there's ever any JavaScript that you could learn that would hinder your experience working in a framework. It's only going to improve your understanding and give you a better understanding of why things work the way they do and why something else might not work the way you want it to. And I think similar for extensions, maybe you don't need to know everything about the platform, but the more you know, the better. Um, you certainly can build extensions with frameworks, but you can also build extensions just using sort of vanilla JavaScript. So, especially if you're doing that, then having a really good understanding of the platform and what it supports is helpful. I'm curious for your thoughts, though. What do you think about sort of how much JavaScript do people need to know, both like for extensions and just in general? I feel like for anyone that's sort of new to development, it's always hard for them to know how long should they spend learning all of the fundamentals.
Yeah. So I think personally, I think it should be um at least the basics, right? The basics
Yeah,
that could get you started, understanding the basics of JavaScript. You might not really have to learn TypeScript like immediately, right? But understanding how JavaScript does, how it interacts with the browser, how it interacts with the DOM, how to change items in the DOM, and understand async JavaScript because that will be very important when you're like interacting with servers and stuff. Yeah, I think
yeah,
just the basics, right? Once you have the foundational knowledge, you can always go back to the docs. You can always go back to um videos or stuff like any stuff you used to like learn JavaScript. But I think it's the basics, right? For me personally, once you understand
yeah.
the basics, you might not really be able to learn everything on the fly on the go before you pick up a project and stuff like that. But another thing about learning JavaScript, not just JavaScript, but like learning anything, right? Is to make sure you're building something with what you're learning because that's the best way to learn,
Yeah,
right? Once you have
yeah, I
examples,
completely
once you're
agree.
building out stuff, I feel like yeah, you definitely get the experience and quickly jump right into becoming a pro in JavaScript and wherever. Yeah, amazing, amazing. So let's quickly talk about the API capabilities, right? So are they popular Chrome extensions APIs we can basically talk about? You feel like developers should know.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there are sort of the essentials that every extension needs. So, I think the Chrome.runtime API is very useful. That sort of gives you
Okay.
a basic understanding of your extension and helps you send messages between different parts of your extension. And so, no matter what you're building, that's probably quite useful. There are APIs like Chrome.tabs, which I think not every extension will need, but lots of extensions end up using either to create tabs or to look at the tabs the user already has open. And then in terms of more exciting capabilities, a couple of years ago we added the side panel API, and
Hmm.
so this allows you to sort of show content in a side panel on the right or the left of the screen. And this is a really nice way to sort of show something which is contextual and related to what's in the page, but without having to try and add elements to the page. Because I don't know if you've ever tried adding content to the page, but you quickly start to run into like trying not to mess up their layout and
Yeah.
not to have your styles interfere with their
Styling. Yeah.
styles, and it just gets really tricky. Yeah,
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Amazing. So those are the popular ones, right? So are there any
yeah.
underrated ones, or should I say underrated APIs you feel developers they don't really use or they might not know about? Um, Maybe exciting APIs. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Are
so I'm really excited. I'm not sure if you've seen the built-in AI APIs that Chrome is working on. But Chrome has been working on taking some of the AI capabilities and
Huh.
having local models that can support those capabilities and run them directly in the browser. And so we have a prompt API where you have sort of a basic on device LLM that you can send prompts to and get answers from. And there are also various other APIs that sort of solve more specific use cases. So language detection or translation. Um, and we're using sort of extensions as a sort of experimentation ground for those. So the prompt API, I think, is actually available to all extensions in Chrome 138, which is the version that came out yesterday. And
Okay.
then we have other APIs that are sort of in trial or behind a flag or in some sort of early preview program. If you go to the documentation on developer.chrome.com, you can find out more about those. But those are really exciting because it's giving you a lot of power. It's fully on device, so you don't need to worry about API costs or billing or anything like that. Um, and it's such a new API that I think we still it's not like an older API where you might feel like everything that could be done with this has already been tried. It's like this
Hmm.
is brand new. There's definitely uh, things that haven't been built with this that could be.
Okay.
And so I definitely encourage you if you're interested in those APIs to take a look.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'll do take a look at the docs and see. I think speaking about the Chrome, like the Chrome itself, right, and the API
Yeah,
capability you just spoke about, and I've gotten to see Chrome has been introducing like new updates when it comes to like AI and your dev tools and like and stuff like that. Yeah, amazing, amazing future. So now speaking about APIs again, right, for the
yeah,
Chrome extensions. So developers mostly have these issues of the context switching, right? Of building
yeah,
for the web and also building for Chrome extensions. So, and I feel like there's a thin line. When I mean thin, like a very thin line between these two different platforms, because at the end of the day, it's still on the web, right? And you're still making use
yeah.
of the same technologies, right, to achieve these applications, right? So what do you think about that thin line? What do you think about the context switching? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I think like going back to what we said at the very start of the episode, we really think of extensions as the web plus more. So
Yeah.
everything is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then there are a few extra APIs on top of that that give you access to some more capabilities or some more data that you wouldn't have access to if you were building a regular website.
Mm-hmm.
And so definitely like anything you build as a website is going to work as an extension, and then you just need to understand some of the nuances that go into those additional APIs. I think one of the um, sort of issues I see developers running into the most is sort of understanding the various contexts that extensions can run code in and what some of the limitations or things to know are. So I mentioned earlier that code can run either in a content script, which sort of means it's equivalent for the most part to sort of adding another script tag to a web page, or it can run
Okay.
in this background, this service worker that's sort of behind the scenes. Uh, when you're injecting code into a web page as a content script, you sort of feel like, well, I'm just running the same as any other script. And for the most part, that's true, but there are some nuances. So uh, let's say you had two script tags on a web page that are like this is outside of an extension to begin with, and in one of them you said window.foo equals a, and then in another
Okay.
one of those scripts you said console.log window.foo. A would be logged to the console because even though they're two different scripts, there are some things about those scripts that are different. They both have access to that same window global.
Yeah.
But if an extension injects a content script and runs console.log window.foo, it actually won't work. It will come back with undefined.
Correct. Yeah.
And the reason for that is that although they're all scripts running on the same page, we actually run the extension scripts in what we call an isolated world. And this basically means we give it a separate copy of the window. We give it sort of a separate copy of that JavaScript environment that it's running in.
Okay.
And this is important because it prevents extensions from interfering, or sorry, it prevents websites from interfering with extensions. So, what we don't want, for example, is for the website to say window.fetch equals undefined. And
Mm-hmm.
then in your extension, if you try and call fetch, it's not going to work because it's been removed. So that's why we sort of give the extension a fresh copy of everything.
Mm.
But if you're not expecting that, it can be confusing. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Having its own copy, I think it solves a lot of like unseen issues immediately. Cool. So speaking about storage, right? I think storage
Yeah,
is another conversation I just want to have on this episode. So speaking about storage, so developers mostly could make the mistake of trying to use the browser the browser storage, the browser web storage, for example, let's say local
yeah,
storage or maybe section storage and stuff like that. Now, how does a Chrome extension how is storage supposed to be handled in a Chrome extension? Like the best practice. How are developers supposed to handle
yeah.
storage when it comes to Chrome extensions?
So that's a really good question. Um, I think the most important thing is to understand what storage is available where, and
Mm-hmm.
specifically like whose storage are you setting. So uh, if you're running in a content script, you have access to local storage and session storage. But because your script is running in the web page, you're not accessing any storage that's specific to the extension. You're actually accessing the session storage and the local storage of the website. And maybe in some cases that's useful because you want to change some data that the website has said in local storage. But if you're trying to store some settings about your extension or some data that's specific to the extension, then it probably isn't the right place because you don't want to store data specifically in that website storage. If you're running on a Chrome extension page, so Chrome extensions can create tabs that have like a Chrome dash extension scheme rather than HTTP or HTTPS. You can also access local storage, and that local storage is actually scoped to the extension's origin. So that is
Huh.
storage that will be accessible on any Chrome extension page, but won't be accessible to a web page. The problem with that is
Mm.
that local storage and session storage aren't available in service workers. And as we've mentioned, sometimes extensions want uh, to run in a service worker, and sometimes they need to access storage in those service workers. So right now, it sounds like there's sort of no silver bullet. um, the solution that we have is some specific storage APIs for extensions. So we have the Chrome.storage APIs, and there's a Chrome.storage.session and Chrome.storage.local.
Mm-hmm.
And these APIs are accessible in service workers, they're accessible in extension pages, they're accessible in content scripts. And no matter where you call them, it's always scoped to the extension. You're never going to accidentally store data for the origin of the web page. And so those APIs are generally what I would reach for if I needed to store anything in extensions. At the same time, there are no rules about what you can use. You can decide what works best for you. So, for example, some extensions have a lot of data to store, and
Mm-hmm.
they choose to use IndexedDB. And IndexedDB is also accessible in service workers and extension pages. It's actually not available in content scripts, or at least it is, but you can't access the extensions IndexedDB. But you can use extension messaging to ask the service worker, hey, can you give me this piece of data? And the service worker can return it to you. So there are ways of making that work. Um, I don't want to go too much into detail here, but
Yeah.
it's also worth saying there are some security considerations with this. So obviously, if you're storing data in the website's local storage, the website can read it. So think about that. Um, Also, when you store data in chrome.storage.session or .local or .sync or any of those storage areas we have, then by default, at least for the local and sync storages, that's available to content scripts. And there are some interesting security problems that you can read about online where that basically means if the website's process is compromised, the website could end up reading your extension data. And so we have some APIs that you can use to help with that. We have an API called set access level, and you can say basically, this is quite sensitive data. Please only ever let my service worker access it. And
Mm,
so
okay.
if you're building some sort of sensitive extension, maybe a password manager, it's really worth sort of reading into the nuances of storage and where it's accessible and what you might be able to do to make your data as safe as possible.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty much amazing about storage. So one more thing I want to talk about when it comes to API
Yeah,
permissions, right? Permissions because building out your extensions, right? You basically there's a lot of permissions. Correct me, right? Yes or no?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
I don't know off the top of my head how many, but
Yeah.
yeah, lots.
Yeah. So there's a lot of permissions for like developers should know and how they should handle and how they should reason around permissions. So can we just talk about permissions when it comes to Chrome extensions?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have some extra APIs in Chrome extensions that aren't available in the web.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, the reasons those aren't available on the web is because they're scary in some way, or they access data that the user may or may not want to give to any particular app or service. And so, the way we handle that, just like how on the web you might have to grant permission for a site to use your microphone or your webcam,
Correct.
in
Yeah.
extensions, you have to grant permission for an extension to use certain capabilities. And the way you do that is in your manifest file, you have an array and you can list different strings to say, I want access to uh, the uh, side panel API, or I want access to the storage APIs. And in the cases where those permissions are sort of more sensitive and less common in extensions, we'll show a prompt to the user when they install the extension to say, hey, just so you know, if you install this extension, it's going to have access to all of your browser history. Is that okay? And the user can choose if it is or not. A common misconception is that all permissions that you might request have a warning. That's not the case. So there are some permissions like storage that don't have a permission warning. So if you install an extension that has the storage permission, we don't ask the user if they're okay with that because there's not really any risk. The extension can only access the data that it stored itself. So we just sort of allow that to happen silently. We do
Hmm.
also have the concept of optional permissions. So you can say, I may or may not need this permission, and then we won't ask about it when the extension's installed, but you can later call an API and say, I'd like to request access to this permission, and we'll prompt the user at that point. So it's a little bit more like what you might see on Android, where you install an app and that's just sort of seamless. But then when you go to maybe upload a photo within the app, it will say, oh, actually, I need access to your files to be able to do this. Uh, right now, that's not something that extensions do as much. Most extensions are just requesting all permissions up front at install time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really something that we want to sort of try and encourage developers to experiment with. So if you think that might work with you, definitely take a look at optional permissions. Um, at the same time, we know that sort of there are improvements we could make to the UI and in other ways to make that easier and more applicable to more extensions. So that's something we're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Speaking about the permissions, right? Most times, it's basically scares users away when maybe they're trying to install an extension and upfront they get to see,
Yeah,
okay, this extension is going to access XYZ, um that's going to need this particular information from you. Like, I don't know, users mostly feel like the consent feels off, right? And they go ahead and uninstall such extensions. And I think permission is a very broad conversation, right? When it comes to
yeah,
extensions. Yeah, cool. So speaking about permission, let's just jump into security, right? Um,
yeah.
so are there common security mistakes developers should avoid when building out Chrome extensions?
Yeah, I think there are a few different answers to that question.
Okay.
In terms of like actual security risks, I think just having a good understanding of sort of web security is really important.
Huh.
Extensions can be vulnerable to lots of the same vulnerabilities that a website can be vulnerable to, whether that's sort of cross-site scripting or other vulnerabilities. So I think learning about those is definitely useful. In terms of sort of security issues that may have your extension rejected during the review process,
Mm-hmm.
um, one that we've seen a lot of that we've really tried to sort of help developers understand is remote hosted code violations. So
Hmm.
going back to sort of manifest v2 versus manifest v3, in Manifest v2, we allowed extensions to, as well as having code that was within that extension directory, have a script tag that pointed somewhere else. But the problem with this is that we could review an extension and everything would look fine. It would seem completely mundane.
Mm-hmm.
But then once we approved that extension and it was published, somebody could go ahead and change the code on that server that their extension was pointing to. And
Hmm.
all of a sudden, the extension would start doing something completely different. So that was
Hmm.
scary. And
Yeah.
so one of the changes that we made is that we no longer allow extensions to load remotely hosted code. And I think in almost all cases, there are solutions to that, and you can work around that. And you can sort of move more code into your extension directory. But it's quite easy to do by accident. Maybe you're installing a framework, and the first thing you reach for is like a CDN link that pulls your framework in from a CDN. And so it's really important to just have an awareness that we don't allow that and know that you need to actually manually download those files and copy them into your extension versus having a script tag that points somewhere externally.
Hmm. Amazing. Um, so speaking about still speaking about security, right? So are they best practices to keep extensions safe and also stable, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of that is sort of what I already mentioned with sort of understanding web security and how you can build things in the right way to prevent that sort of thing from happening. Also, like keeping your account secure. Like maybe you're a developer that really cares about security. You do a really good job of making sure your extension is always safe. But then if somebody gets access to your Chrome Web Store account, they can try and publish something malicious that you had nothing to do with. And so
Hmm.
it's not just sort of about thinking about the code that you're writing, but actually thinking about the whole supply chain and sort of is there any opportunity for somebody else to maybe open a PR against my repository and merge something maliciously? Or can they somehow submit an extension to the Chrome Web Store on my behalf? And we try and prevent that as much as we can. So we require two-factor authentication for accounts in the Chrome Web Store. We recently launched a feature where you can sort of require that everything you upload to the Chrome Web Store is signed with a key. So you can be
Okay.
sure that anything we publish has been signed by that key. But some of this does fall on developers as well to just have an awareness of that risk and make sure that they have strong passwords and um, don't use the same password in the same place or the same password in different places. Because if you have an extension with lots of users, then you also have a big responsibility. And I think that can dawn on people very quickly because it's easy to build an extension that you only expected to have a few dozen users and suddenly has hundreds or thousands or millions of users.
Amazing. Cool. So speaking about publishing to the Chrome Web Store, right?
Yeah.
Making the research about this episode, and I got to realize that most developers they have the complaint about maybe blockers or reasons for their web store for their web Chrome extensions to get rejected. So can we just quickly talk about it, right? So what are the common blockers or the reasons for most rejections you've gotten to like maybe see on the team? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned remote hosted code. I think that's a really big one. And so just
Mm-hmm.
making sure that everything your extension needs is already in the package. Um, Oftentimes, just sort of a well intentioned developer not properly filling out all of the information we request in the Chrome Web Store. So we ask for a justification for each of the permissions you're using.
Okay.
Make sure all the permissions you're requesting are actually permissions you need and that you have a good justification for those.
All
Make sure
right.
that the description of your extension actually properly explains what it does and how a reviewer might expect it to work. Um, if you're doing all of those things, then you're already sort of a long way there. Um,
Mm.
I think beyond that, it sort of spreads out a little bit more, and you sort of get into the long tail of other violations that can be very varied. But sort of understanding we have our program policy pages, we sort of share externally all of the different policies that um, might impact a user during or impact a developer during review. So you can read through those and get a good understanding for what we're looking for and what rules we have about what we allow in extensions. If people are interested in this, I'd also recommend a year or so ago now, me and Patrick, who's also on my team, did a video where we actually went and met with the review team that's reviewing these extensions and
Okay.
sort of ask them for their advice and ask them for examples of um, when they'd seen interesting violations or some of the interesting malicious code they'd seen in the store. And we sort of made a whole podcast out of that. So
Hmm.
I really enjoyed that. I was very proud of that video, and it might be interesting to anyone who's asking these sorts of questions.
Okay, cool. So quickly speaking about timeline, right? So
Yeah.
is there a definite or a particular timeline for a Chrome extension to get approved into the web store, right? So how long does it really take?
So there's no timeline. We
Okay.
do have a Chrome Web Store review process documentation page that has some statistics, and I think from the top of my head, actually, let me just get it up to make sure I get this right.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
so yeah, the documentation says in early 2021, most submissions completed review in less than 24 hours. And I
Hmm.
spoke to the team recently. I think that's still the case. So most submissions are still being reviewed in less than 24 hours. And then over 90% are completed within 3 days.
Hmm.
That sort of matches my experience. It's like most developers either see a very quick review or, in the worst case, sort of 3 or 4 days. If it gets to sort of longer than a week, then definitely encourage developers to reach out to us using either there's a one-stop support form where you can directly speak to the review team, or you can come to the mailing list and ask a question. It shouldn't be taking longer than that, but really we try and make the review process quick as possible. There are always exceptions or maybe a reason why one particular submission takes longer. But like, yeah, I know it's friction. I've built extensions before I was at Google and gone through the review process. So I
Yeah.
understand that once you've built something, you just want it live as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
just finding that balance between we want to make sure we review code thoroughly and something doesn't get published to the store that's doing something nefarious.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So quickly, let's just talk about platforms, gaps, and limitations, right? So
Yeah.
um, are Chrome extensions ever coming to mobile? Are they ever coming to Chrome on the mobile phones? Are we ever gonna have a support for that? Why and why not?
So it's something that I've heard a lot of developers ask about. The honest answer is it's just not something on our roadmap at the moment. So
Huh.
yeah, I would personally love to see it, but unfortunately, I don't have anything to share. It's not something we're working on.
Okay. Okay. Amazing. Amazing. Because like you said, a lot of developers definitely want something like that. I think there might
Yeah,
be quite some limitations to how it works. But yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely wanted to just ask
I
that
definitely
question.
find it very interesting. Like,
Yeah.
uh, as a developer, I've built extensions for like Safari on iOS before.
Yeah.
Um, it's very cool, but at the same time, like you say, it's definitely a you have different UI constraints. You have to think
Yeah.
about what
Yeah.
makes sense on mobile
Uh,
and how can I build this. So it's yeah, it's a very interesting space. I think we're still sort of seeing developers figure out what makes sense there.
okay. Cool. So speaking about the the capability of what's the word now, of building out a Chrome extension, right? Are there any two sets you feel like should exist right now that they don't currently exist? Or should I say, I don't know if you get the question right. So are there two sets of creating your Chrome extensions and stuff like that that you wish they actually exist before now, or that should be existing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I I'm both very lucky and a little bit unlucky in that I spend so much time speaking to the engineering team working on extensions that I know what I would really like, and also I can hear everything that they've told me about why that would be really hard or um, why maybe we won't get this tomorrow. But like
Hmm.
personally, I'd love to see more UI capabilities. We had the side panel that I mentioned where you can show content alongside the page. That was really exciting when it launched. But I think there's so much more that developers want to build in terms of maybe some sort of accessibility overlay that overlays the whole page, or some
Hmm.
sort of action bar similar to like Spotlight on macOS that pops up in the center of the screen. All of these things are possible today using content scripts, but it feels a little bit clunky. You need uh, full access to the page, which is always, like you say, quite a some of the permissions can be scary for users. And so finding more ways to give developers some of these capabilities without all of the permission requests, I think would be really nice. Even something as simple as like if you're building an extension that can uh, do some action with an input field, then maybe some way of saying, can you just every time there's a password field, show an icon for my extension? And my extension doesn't need to be involved there. It doesn't need to run any code, but I just want you to let the user know that my extension could do something here. And then maybe if the user clicks on that icon, you wake me up and tell me that the user has invoked my extension. But more of those sort of declarative APIs where your extension isn't necessarily doing a lot of work, but it's just saying to the browser, hey, if the user is ever in this situation, let me know that I'm here and ready for them if they need me.
Hmm. Amazing. That would be something that makes a lot of sense. Like if we get to have something like that, maybe on Chrome extensions, like why building out Chrome extensions, right? So another question, right, has to do with resources and learning how to build Chrome extensions
Yeah.
because um when like I said, I built out my first Chrome extension like some years ago. I don't know if that has changed now, right? In the effort of trying to learn, right, I had the documentation, right, the docs, which was quite helpful, and so I'm basically referring to the resources, right? Resources are still scattered.
Yeah.
So, are there any efforts to like improve maybe documentation, onboarding for developers? So, like, um, currently, I think there's definitely not a central place for learning extensions, how to build Chrome extensions. So are there any efforts or plans to like fix that from the team currently?
Yeah. So we try and help Mozilla to keep MDN up to date
Huh.
with all of the extension APIs that are sort of shared between the browsers. So just like with a web API, you can go to MDN and you can see the extension APIs that we all support and whether they're supported in Chrome and Firefox and Safari and Edge.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's definitely a good resource.
Mm-hmm.
Um, MDN itself has some extension tutorials. On the Chrome side, we maintain our own documentation, especially because we sort of have some APIs that are only available in Chrome.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you can go to developer.chrome.com, and then in the extension section, you can find we have a whole sort of getting started section that talks you through how to build some basic extensions. We have sort of more detailed documentation that uh, tells you how to either use more advanced APIs or to do something like some sort of automated testing of your extension. We also have a samples repository in GitHub where we have sort of API samples that tell you how to use a particular API
Okay.
or functional samples that show you how you can take multiple APIs and sort of join them together to build something. And so uh, that's a lot of resources. Like you say, it is a little bit sort of scattered around. I can't say that we have like the one answer that's going to solve that for everyone,
Yeah.
but we are definitely trying to improve the onboarding all the time. And if developers have particular feedback, then I'd love to hear it. Um, yeah, we want to sort of write tutorials and documentation that's going to be helpful and actually answer the questions that people have.
Okay, amazing. Amazing. Cool. Um so basically where do you see Chrome extensions in the next 5 years? So this question now is broad, right? I'm basically talking about
Yeah.
the future of Chrome extension, right? And maybe the updates coming from the team in the next few months and years like that. So where do you see Chrome extension in the next 5 years? Will they be more powerful?
Yeah,
Will they,
it's a
will they
really good
be
question.
will they be more restricted? Like, what do you think?
So I mean, yeah, thinking 5 years ahead is always really hard. I mean, like if you went back 5 years ago, then lots would be the same, but lots would be different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think one thing is that extensions are sort of the underlying platform. So I hope that there will always be some stability to that platform. I hope that that platform will always exist,
Mm.
and that one of the biggest changes will just be what developers choose to build using that platform. So, AI is a really good example where although we've done some work now, if you go back a couple of years ago, we hadn't really made any changes in extensions to accommodate AI or to give developers any more AI capabilities.
Yeah.
But developers just realized, oh, hey, this platform is really great for building these products. We're going to use it and we're going to build our own thing. And so we saw more submissions in the Chrome Web Store, not because we'd done anything, but just because developers had found a new way to use it. And so I can't say what the next thing will be, but I'm sure developers will find interesting new ideas that they want to build using what we already have. Um, I hope we have more progress on moving towards a single set of APIs that works across browsers. So, like I mentioned, we have the community group where we're working together on that. We're also looking to create a W3C working group. We're still quite early in that process and figuring out what it means and how we can go about that, but we're passionate about trying to see if we can do that. Um, and so that would be another step, and hopefully eventually lead to having more of a sort of formal specification for this is how extension API should work. And then I'm sure there'll be new capabilities that we choose to add. I don't know what those will be. I mentioned earlier some of the things I'd love to see, but I think only time will tell what we actually end up building.
Yeah, definitely. Time is definitely gonna tell. So speaking about like 5 years ago, we basically didn't even see where we are currently, like on in the tech space, right? In as much as I think we had AI back then, but we definitely did
Yeah.
not we definitely did not see what was gonna happen in the next 5 years. Yeah. So I think it's quite
Yeah.
an amazing future, right? Thinking about it like that and thinking about Chrome extensions, thinking about the web, what's coming in the web, and what's going to be new next 5 years. Um, so one last thing I just want to touch on this particular episode is monetization, right? Developers
Yeah.
monetizing their Chrome extensions. So what are the procedures there for developers, right? That are thinking to build Chrome extensions that are paid or Chrome extensions that are like pay as you go, right? So let's quickly just talk about monetization when it comes to Google Chrome extensions.
Yeah. So all of the extensions in the Chrome Web Store are free. We don't have any sort of support for um, charging to download an extension
Mm-hmm.
or any sort of built-in support for in-app purchases or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, you can definitely earn money from your extensions.
Hmm.
So at the very minimum, you could sort of add a Patreon link or some sort of donation link and accept donations that way. Um, you could also choose to charge for your service. It's very common to have an extension where you install it and then you need to sign in with an account. Maybe there's a free plan and then you can upgrade to a paid plan, or maybe you already need to be a paying subscriber to some service to get the benefit of the extension.
Yeah.
And so there are definitely ways to monetize your work. And then, of course, like there are companies that sell extensions to businesses to solve various business cases. Um, and so there are these sorts of different avenues you can take. I think as a sort of smaller developer, it can still be really hard to figure out how do I monetize? Like, what's the best option for me? And that's something that we're still thinking about. We don't have like a single go-to answer, but we want to make it easier to uh, sort of support developers that are building extensions because of course like there are lots of developers who are very generous with their time and build things for free and just because they like the community and they want to help people, but uh, it takes time and resources and uh, yeah, I get that too. So I'm hopeful in the future we'll be able to do more there.
Hmm. Amazing. So I think this has been a very very amazing episode. Um, a cool episode, right? We've talked about Chrome extension. We've talked about how to get started. We've talked about permissions. Talked about storage. Talked about security and best practices. And we also talked about monetization and publishing to the Chrome web store. So I think we've come to the end of this conversation, and for developers that are looking to build Chrome extensions and getting started, I think this episode should definitely get you started. And there are other resources out there on the docs. I'll leave a link to the docs for developers that want to get started or that want to like learn more from the documentation. So is there any advice for developers who want to build something big in the web store? Just one advice before we wrap up the episode.
I think to boil it down to one thing, it's just the sort of like build things and people will come. I think we're very lucky in the web store that um, there's a lot of sort of organic discovery. So
Mm-hmm.
there are cases where sort of you can build an extension, you can do very little promotion, And if you've built something that people want, people will find it, people will install it. And
Hmm.
that's how we've ended up with some really large extensions with millions of users. Um, the developers just built something that solved a problem that people had or helped people out day to day. And so just go out there and build something, find a problem that you have or a problem that your friends have, and solve that problem.
Hmm. Amazing, amazing. So yeah, thank you, Oliver, for coming to the episode and coming for the podcast to come have this recording. Um, I think we've come to this end of this particular episode, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, Oliver. Yeah,
Bye. Thank you so much for having me.
yeah, sure.